Picture America in 1798. The ink on the Constitution is barely dry. George Washington has just finished his presidency. The young nation, still bleeding from the revolution, is drunk on freedom and hungry for land. Beyond the Appalachian Mountains lies the frontier, a vast, untamed wilderness stretching all the way to the Mississippi. This is no romantic landscape. This is hell dressed in green. The forests are so dense, a man can walk 10 feet off the trail and disappear forever. The rivers run swift and cold, hiding bodies better than any grave. In Kentucky and Tennessee, the soil is rich, but the land is cruel, claimed by native tribes who fight for every acre, prowled by panthers and wolves that see settlers as easy prey. The people who come here are either running from something or chasing something. War veterans with empty pockets and blood still in their eyes. Land speculators looking to get rich. Outlaws who know the states to the east have gotten too civilized. There are no sheriffs here, no courts, no gallows but the nearest tree. Justice comes from the barrel of a flintlock or the edge of a hunting knife. Men settle arguments with blood, not lawyers. Into this world rides two men who will make the wilderness even darker. Micajah Harpe, also known as Big Harpe, loomed over other men like a gallows shadow, all corded muscles and jagged bones. His gaze flat and lifeless as a gutted fish on the riverbank. His brother, Wiley Harpe, or Little Harpe, moved like a blade between the ribs, compact, razor sharp, with a smile like a gash in his face, never widening, never fading, just there, like the edge of a knife held to your throat. They claim to be veterans of the revolution. They say they fought for liberty. The truth? They learned one lesson from the war: how easy it is to kill. By 1798, they developed their own twisted code. Never leave a witness, never kill the same way twice, and never let mercy slow your hand. They drifted through the frontier like a plague, sometimes posing as preachers, sometimes as traders. They'll share your campfire one night, but slit your throat the next. This is the story of America's first serial killers. Not the fancy, philosophical murders of later centuries. These are primal killers, brutal, cunning, and utterly without remorse. The Harpe brothers didn't just kill. They turned murder into an art form, and the frontier is their canvas, painted in blood. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Dark History Podcast, where we explore the darkest parts of human history. I hope you're all doing well. I'm Rob, your host as always, and you're listening to Season 4, Episode 7. Strap yourselves in, people, because this gets dark. Today, we're riding into the wild, untamed heart of early America. That period just after the Revolution, when the frontier was less a place than a state of mind. Picture this. You've got war veterans still jumpy from years of combat, land so cheap that it's practically free for the taking, and about 3 lawmen every 1,000 square miles of wilderness. It was a kind of place where men settled arguments with flintlocks and hunting knives, where travellers disappeared without explanation, and where the difference between a preacher and an outlaw was often just who told the story first. Now, in this world of hard men and harder justice, even by frontier standards, the Harpe brothers were something special. These weren't your run-of-the-mill highwaymen, or bar brawlers gone too far. No. What set the Harpe brothers apart was the artistry of their cruelty. The way they turned murder into a personal signature. And by the time their reign of terror was ended, they'd written their names across the frontier in blood, leaving behind scenes so vicious they made hardened frontiersmen puke into their beards. Alright folks, time to hitch up your britches and check your powders dry. We're riding down the Natchez Trail to meet America's first serial killers. As we settle around the campfire tonight, take a good look at the faces beside you. Study their hands. Watch their eyes when they laugh. Because out here, the difference between a travelling companion and your killer might just be which way the wind blows. And when the shadows grow long on these forest trails, that's when the real dark history begins. To understand the true horror of the Harpe brothers, we must travel back to the rugged, mist-shrouded hills of 1760s North Carolina. This was the American backcountry, a raw, untamed land where Scotch-Irish immigrants carved out hard-scabbled existences between the wilderness and the growing tensions that would soon explode into the revolution. Into the world came Micajah Harpe, born around 1768, followed soon after by his brother Wiley. Their childhood was a perfect breeding ground for monsters. Their father, a stern Presbyterian preacher, ruled his household with an iron fist and a leather strap. Sunday sermons about hellfire and damnation were punctuated by weekday beatings for the slightest infractions. Their mother, worn down by frontier life and constant pregnancies, could offer little comfort. The boys learned early that power came from fear, and that cruelty often went unpunished in this isolated corner of the colonies. By the time Big Harpe was 12, he already stood nearly 6 feet tall, and had the strength of a grown man. Little Harpe, though smaller in stature, possessed a razor-sharp mind and a serpent's charm that made him even more dangerous than his hulking brother. Neighbours whispered about incidents best left unspoken. Farm animals found mutilated, young children coming home with unexplained bruises, fires that always seemed to break out after the Harpe boys had been turned away from somebody's door. When the American Revolution erupted in 1775, the Harpe brothers saw their chance to escape their miserable existence. Some records suggest that they joined up with the Loyalist militia, not out of any political conviction, but because the British were known to pay well and turn a blind eye to any looting. Other accounts placed them with the Patriot Irregulars, where their talent for violence might have been useful in hunting down Tory sympathisers. The truth is likely that they fought on whichever side offered them the best opportunities for plunder at any given moment. The war years became their finishing school in brutality. They learned how to trap men through the dense forest, how to interrogate prisoners with hot knives, and how to disappear after committing atrocities. Most importantly, they discovered that in times of war, nobody asked too many questions about missing persons or mutilated bodies. By war's end, they had perfected their craft, but found themselves adrift in a world that no longer needed their particular skills. In the post-war years, the brothers drifted westward, with the flood of settlers moving into Tennessee and Kentucky. They tried their hand at various trades: land speculation, horse trading, and even preaching, but their violent tendencies always surfaced. They married sisters Susan and Sally Rice, not out of love, but because every outlaw needs someone to cook, clean and provide cover for their activities. The wives would later claim they lived in constant fear of their husband's unpredictable rages. By the mid-1790s, the Harpe brothers had fully embraced their true nature. The frontier was a perfect hunting ground, vast, sparsely populated, and largely lawless. Travellers disappeared regularly, their fates blamed on Indians, wild animals, or simple misfortune. The Harpes moved through the landscape like wolves, their crimes hidden by the wilderness, and the assumption that no white man could commit such atrocities against their own kind. Then came 1779, and a chance encounter with a traveller named Johnson near Knoxville. The man was heading west with his life savings, full of optimism about starting anew in the frontier. He made the fatal mistake of sharing a campfire with two charming, well-spoken strangers, who offered to guide him through the dangerous territory. What happened next would shock even the hardened residents of the frontier, and mark the beginning of the Harpe brothers' reign of terror. The Harpe brothers didn't just kill, they conducted a gruesome experiment in human suffering. Their first confirmed murder, that of a traveller named Johnson in 1797, was a revelation to them. After robbing him, they didn't simply shoot or stab him. They took turns in cutting him, watching how long he could stagger forward before collapsing. Then came the innovation. They weighted his slashed open corpse with stones and threw him in the river, placing bets on whether he'd sink or float. When the body resurfaced days later, bloated and torn by fish, they took it as a challenge to do better next time. And there was always a next time. In the summer of 1798, a farmer named Stump found his neighbour's cabin eerily quiet. Inside, he discovered the entire family butchered in their beds. The father's skull crushed with a tomahawk. The mother repeatedly stabbed in a way that suggested she'd been kept alive for hours. Their infant had been taken from its cradle, and what was left didn't resemble a child anymore. The killers had arranged the bodies in a grotesque display, the mother's hands positioned as if cradling the remains. That winter, near the Cumberland River, a young girl travelling with her family began crying as the Harpes shared their campfire. Little Harpe smiled, told the parents not to worry, then smashed the child's head against a wagon wheel until her skull cracked like an egg. When the mother screamed, Big Harpe cut her throat so deeply it nearly decapitated her. The father lasted longer. They broke his fingers one by one before finally crushing his windpipe under Big Harpe's boots. Their methods grew more inventive with each kill. A peddler was forced to swallow his words. Needles, buttons, scraps of tin, before they slit his belly open to see the result. Two young lovers were tied together and drowned in a shallow creek, their bodies arranged in an obscene embrace. A tavern keeper's family was slaughtered, their blood used to write crude verses on the wall. The brothers developed signatures. Big Harpe favoured crushing blows. Rocks to the head, knees to the ribs, trees used as bludgeons. Little Harpe preferred knives, and the intimate violence they allowed. Cutting, probing, making victims watch what he did to their loved ones first. They often switched weapons mid-murder, passing the knife or tomahawk between them like craftsmen sharing tools. By 1799, the entire region lived in terror. Settlers spoke of the Harpe curse, how you might invite two charming strangers to supper, only to wake with their knives at your throat. how they seemed to take pleasure in violating all frontier codes of hospitality, how they'd sometimes let one family member escape, only to track them down days later, when hope had returned. The killing reached a horrific peak near Cave-in Rock on the Ohio River, where the brothers spent weeks using the remote location as their private abattoir. Here, they impaled a Methodist preacher on a sapling, slowly, over the course of a few days, drowned 3 sisters while forcing their brother to watch, then sewed his eyelids open before killing him. They crucified a slave trader upside down and buried him alive, one of the few victims who might have deserved it. Yet even monsters make mistakes, and in July of 1799, after nearly 2 years and at least 40 murders across 3 territories, Big Harpe got careless with a pregnant woman named Stiegel. The summer of 1799 marked the beginning of the end for Big Harpe. Drunk on his own legend and growing increasingly reckless, he made his fatal mistake when he attacked the Stiegel family near present-day Henderson, Kentucky. This time, his victim was visibly pregnant Mrs. Stiegel, and crucially, he left a witness, her husband, Major Stiegel, who despite his grievous wounds managed to crawl to his neighbour's cabin. What made this murder particularly horrific was Big Harpe's actions when realising the woman was with child. With his methodic cruelty, he used a hunting knife to perform a crude cesarean, removing the unborn infant and callously discarding it before turning his attention back to his butchery. Within hours, a 30-man posse led by Captain John Leeper was hot on Big Harpe's trail. They found him camped arrogantly near the Ohio River, so confident in his invincibility that he hadn't even bothered to hide. When called to surrender, the giant killer reportedly laughed and reached for his rifle. The gunfire that followed wasn't the clean justice of legend, it was messy, frontier vengeance. The first bullet shattered Harpe's spine, dropping him to the dirt, but leaving him fully conscious and cursing his captors. As Big Harpe lay writhing in the dirt, the posse debated what to do with the monster, who had terrorised the territory. This was a man who had killed at least 28 people by most accounts, who had boasted of eating parts of some of his victims, and who had once bragged he could kill a man before breakfast and not lose his appetite. The decision was made not to bring him to trial. Instead, they propped the paralysed killer against a tree where he reportedly continued to curse them, spit blood and laugh even as his life drained away. When death came too slowly for the posse's liking, a blacksmith named Moses Stiegel, the victim's brother-in-law, took up an axe. The decapitation was anything but clean. It took 3 brutal, hacking blows to sever Big Harpe's head from his body. The grisly trophy was then impaled on a stake at a fork in the Wilderness Road, positioned so the empty eye sockets stared back at travellers coming down the very trail the Harpes had terrorised for years. For months afterwards, pioneers reported seeing the bleached skull, tufts of hair still clinging to it, as it slowly weathered in the elements, a stark warning to all who passed that way. As for Little Harpe, he managed to slip away during the manhunt of his brother. He changed his name to John Stetton and tried to disappear, even joining Samuel Mason's river pirate gang on the Natchez Trace. But the frontier has a long memory. In 1804, after participating in Mason's murder, Little Harpe made a fatal mistake of trying to collect the bounty on his own accomplice's head. When authorities realised who he really was, they showed him no mercy. He was hanged near Greenville, Mississippi, and like his brother before him, his body was left to rot in the sun as a final insult. Some accounts say his head joined Big Harpe's on a pike at the Wilderness Road Fork. though it remains unconfirmed. Either way, the Harpes' reign of terror had finally ended, but the nightmares that they had created would linger in the frontier memory for generations. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this dark episode. I know these stories aren't easy to sit with. They shouldn't be. What the Harpe brothers did to those poor souls along the frontier wasn't just murder. It was something darker, something that crawled under the skin of an entire generation and never really left. The Harpes weren't just killers, they were myth-makers in the truest sense. Their crimes became a kind of campfire story that made travellers check their locks twice, that had parents warning their children about strangers on the road, the decades after the brothers were gone. You can still hear the echoes of their legend in ghost stories of Tennessee's hollers and Kentucky's hollows, tales of two shadowy figures that walk the back roads at dusk, or the faint sound of an axe blow near the old wilderness trails. The numbers alone are staggering. Most historians agree that at least 28 confirmed murders, but the frontier gossip and lost records suggest that the real count might have been 40, even 50 victims. The truth is, we'll never know for certain. In those wild, untamed territories, people disappeared all the time. Travellers swallowed by wilderness, families vanishing from isolated cabins. How many of those missing souls met their ends at the Harpes' hands? How many bones still lie buried in unmarked graves beneath what is now farmland or suburb? What makes the Harpes different from the other outlaws of their time is the sheer inventiveness of their cruelty. They weren't just robbing people. They were conducting grotesque experiments in suffering. The weighted bodies in rivers, the mutilated pregnant women, the children killed simply because they were there. These weren't crimes of passion or desperation. They were the act of two men who had discovered they enjoyed the work. And perhaps most chilling of all, they were the first. Before Bundy, before Gacy, before the term serial killer existed, America had the Harpe brothers. They wrote the blueprint for the many monsters that would follow them in the centuries to come. So next time you're driving down some lonely back road at night, or telling a ghost story around a fire, remember, the scariest monsters aren't supernatural. They're the ones who are all too real. Anyway, if you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us reach more listeners by boosting our visibility in the algorithm. If you think friends and family might enjoy the podcast, don't hesitate to share it with them. You'll find links to our socials below. I know ads can sometimes be a pain, so if you'd prefer ad-free episodes, check out the Patreon link also provided. Supporting us on Patreon is a great way to contribute, but it's entirely optional. We also have a merch store, linked below, where any purchases greatly support the show and help cover production costs. If you've been listening for a while and haven't subscribed yet, please do so. In that way, you never miss an episode. Thank you for your support. So with all that out the way, thank you again for listening. Join us next time for our next episode as we delve into another event and more dark history.